Welcome to the Athlete Insights Podcast, hosted by Yash Pad Day, a podcast focused on letting athletes tell their journeys in their sport. This podcast is presented by Boxed Water. Boxed water is better.
Welcome into another episode of the Athlete Insights Podcast. Today I've got my guest, Kevin Lynch. He's the head coach at Butler University in their football program. Appreciate you, Coach Lynch, taking the time. I know you guys are starting spring ball, getting into that mix.
All good. Thanks for having
spring
me,
ball.
man.
So I appreciate you.
It.
Yeah, you coming on, man, and spending time. So
No
let's
problem.
let's talk about. I always try to go back from the beginning and try to understand the careers of people that I interview. So
Mhm.
want to talk to you about kind of what was that first before even football. Let's talk sport in
Yeah.
general. What was the first time you really fell in love with sport? What age and kind of what was the first time you really
Yeah, I
fell in
can
love
tell
with that?
me growing up, I can't tell you a time I wasn't involved in sports.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm the youngest of four kids. All my family played, and so from a very early,
Gotcha.
obviously, I was drugged to games and went everywhere with everybody and had to sit in the stands and watch. So you grow
Mhm.
and love that piece of it, and then I think naturally you're just kind of competitor because you're playing with your brothers and your sister and all that good stuff that growing up you're kind of in. I'm also a coach's kid, so
Yeah.
grew up, football in college football specifically. So
Mhm.
who I am, we were never pushed to play or do that. We were always pushed to, find what was best for us and what we wanted to do. But
Yeah.
all kind of chose some form of coaching.
Gotcha. And was football, you said you grew up in college football. I know you said you're a
Yeah,
coach's kid. I know Coach Lynch, Bill Lynch was, premier guy at Indiana with Indiana football,
yeah,
and associated with that. Were there any other sports that you played growing up,
yeah. So I
in
played
that
them
regard?
all.
Okay.
Growing up
Gotcha.
as a kid.
Gotcha.
In high school, I played, football, basketball, and baseball. And football, basketball mainly being my main sports. I will say one thing I didn't do when I was in high school. I did
Hmm.
not play baseball um, in high school until my senior year. I played baseball
Mm.
from t-ball to through eighth grade, and then I decided I wanted to do a bunch of AAU basketball stuff and all this stuff
Gotcha.
in the summer,
Gotcha.
which honestly was a mistake. I really enjoyed playing that last year of baseball in high school, and you take that much time off of the sport.
Yeah.
It wasn't nearly as good as I wanted to be, but
Hmm.
I do think playing all the sports is awesome, and love golf. I played a lot of golf. I play a lot of golf now,
Yeah.
but I took up golf when I was probably my parents put us in everything. I did that as a little kid, as a junior, and then didn't play kind of because of the other sports, but had a
Yeah.
little bit of an understanding of the game when I was really young, and then
Yeah.
started playing it in high school. So, um,
I'm a big golfer, so that's
yeah, I can't.
good to connect.
I love golf, man. I
Yeah.
hate to say it. I joke. I'll say that stuff times in the office sometimes. Like, yeah, well, what's your favorite sport? I'm like golf.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but it's obviously fun to do, and anytime you get to compete, and
Yeah.
that's what's so cool about golf, right? You can do that till forever,
Forever.
versus
Yeah.
football. When it's over, you put your helmet up, can't
It's
do it again.
done. Yeah.
That's what's cool about that.
Yeah. And speaking of alluding to your high school career, we'll kind of go into that. Can you talk about, you said you played pretty much every sport. Can you talk
Yeah,
about your high school experience playing
yeah.
sport
So
and going
really
through that
lucky. I
experience?
went to Delta High School in Muncie, Indiana.
Hmm.
At that time, my dad was the football coach at Ball State. So really, where I'd call home and where I grew up is in Muncie.
Yeah.
Um, but I played for some outstanding coaches, football and basketball, and
Gotcha.
baseball as well. But my football and basketball coach specifically, because I spent the most time with that, both are Indiana Hall of Famers at
Hmm.
their respective
Gotcha.
sports.
Yeah.
Won a ton of games, won a lot of championships in
Hmm.
both. So that part of it was awesome because I think, as we know, anytime you're winning, your experience is always that much better. But I was
Hmm.
fortunate to be on some really good teams and around some really good guys that, are still lifelong friends. So great experience with those. And one
Hmm.
thing I like about my high school coaches and their experience, they're both great coaches and great guys, but they were far different, styles.
Yeah.
Probably their approach to each sport. Now, both worked extremely hard and
Hmm.
the sport was very, very important to them, but they were different in their approach. And, I think you learn that because I think as a coach, um, regardless of what you do, you got to be your personality
Hmm.
as I am today, but you
Yeah.
do pull a lot from the different coaches you're around. And I certainly think my high school coaches are different for me for that way.
Gotcha. And can you talk about, I'm always interested as well with that, the recruiting process, and the recruiting process of athletes and coaches that have gone through as student athletes. So can you touch on kind of, and now coach, it's
Yeah.
changed so much with NIL and transfer portal and all
It
that.
changed
But
quite a bit. My
but
my
when
story would be a little different.
mhm,
So I was saying I was the youngest of four. I had
mhm,
two played Division I football. I played Division III.
mhm,
Uh, so one thing that I am fortunate of, and at the time I probably didn't think so, but
yeah,
my dad that was very, very honest with me.
mhm,
And I don't think we always get that right now in society. And probably I've said this before, probably through the test of time, parents often think their kids are better than they are.
yeah,
I'm guilty of that sometimes too with my small kids. So
uh-huh,
I remember being in college or in high school, maybe by my junior year or so,
uh-huh,
um, and asking my dad what he thought, what he thought I'd be, and he said, "Well, if you really want to play sports in college, you're probably going to be Division III. Division
mhm,
three is the best route." And I remember thinking, I had a brother that was just a few years older than me,
yeah,
um, Joey, who was recruited pretty hard out of high school, and maybe had some options at the Division I level to um, choose where he wanted to go, and
mhm,
ultimately choose Ball State. But
yeah,
um, so my experience was different. Now I was recruited by different Division IIIs, actually in football and basketball. Ultimately chose to play football.
mhm,
Um, and I had a great experience. I had I worked or I played for a really good head coach and a guy named Mike Leonard at Franklin College that is kind of a legend in his own right, and
mhm,
done a lot of great things, won a lot, and had a great experience. So that was kind of mine. Really was Division III schools within a few hour radius there of Muncie, and
gotcha,
the guys that were reaching out to me. So that's
gotcha.
that's kind of my journey.
And what's been like when you went from high school to Franklin College D3, what was the
Mhm.
biggest difference that you noticed between
I
high
think
school ball and college ball?
I would tell you for me
Hmm.
and how I grew up, the majority of my time was always around Division I football.
Gotcha.
uh, because I was the youngest, and by then my dad's career was mostly FBS football at that time.
Hmm.
Now he had some other jobs between that, so that's kind of all I knew,
Hmm.
and what those guys were and all that. So in my mind, um, you know, and I wouldn't say this, I said this publicly or anything like that, but like
Yeah.
I would have just thought Division III would have been a lesser player. And I
Mm.
think once I got to that level and I realized there's a lot of good players and there's a lot of
Yeah.
good players everywhere. And I
Yeah.
think that was probably what I learned uh, early on, that
Gotcha.
it's a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
Ended up being a very rewarding experience, but that was probably what I would tell you was my biggest adjustment. I probably had a little bit of a advantage on some guys in terms of knowing what to expect
Mm.
in college, in
Yeah.
terms of what was going to be asked of us from a program standpoint and stuff outside of football. But that would be my biggest thing that happened to me that kind of jumped out to me for sure.
For sure. And I read something the other day, an article that said like the next Alabama running back or the next running back at, in the NFL, like a Derrick Henry's coming
Yeah.
out of JUCO now or D3 or D2. So it is interesting that you mentioned that like the talent level at D3, just because it's D3 doesn't mean it's any lesser competition
Yeah,
than
I,
what.
I would say by and large, yeah, the levels you got, you talk about the Power 4
Hmm.
level, the athletically,
Yeah.
they are going to be better than
Yeah.
Division III.
Yeah.
Um, Size, strength,
100%.
and then there's always those misses. There's always those guys that
Hmm.
develop, but there's also a really good place, and nobody talks about that enough. That hey, that is what this person is. He is a Division III football player, and there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. Still
Yeah.
can play great football. Still can have a great experience. It doesn't have to be, well, I was under recruited. I'm going to go Division III, and then now I'm going to try to work my way up and play at a higher level. Uh,
100%.
there's nothing wrong with that piece of it too, and I think that kind of gets missed a little bit. Do I
Hmm.
think that's going to continue to happen in football? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can think of my time at Ball State. Obviously, we had some success with guys that played maybe at a lower level and then finished their careers at Ball State or something like that. I do think there's always a really good place for that as well.
Hmm.
Uh, but I do think that that's not always the case.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And then you you transition to the coaching side of
Yeah.
football. Can you talk about your journey, kind of describe a little bit your
Yeah.
journey in coaching so far?
I got done playing, and then I actually my last year of college.
Mhm.
And I knew I wanted to coach at a pretty young age. I mean,
Yeah.
I was 13 or 14 years old, and I knew I was going to coach.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of building to that. Worked a lot of camps in college,
Mhm.
specifically at Bishop Darlington Football Camp, which is a big camp within the Midwest, and
Mhm.
worked a lot of different positions with that. But my senior year of college, I did an internship at University of Indianapolis because it was only about 20 minutes north of Franklin, and really worked with them their whole spring ball.
Okay. Yeah.
That went well. And then I GA'd at Indiana. Now I was a
Yeah.
quality control coach, but at that time,
Mhm.
essentially I was a GA.
Mhm.
And I worked with the quarterbacks, and that was a great experience for me.
Mhm.
Then after that, which was nice, I got hired at UIndy back there, but as the full-time coach, as the receivers coach. So I
Gotcha.
coached there for 6 years. Had some different roles from there, whether it was receivers to start with, and the receivers and recruiting coordinator.
Mhm.
Then I went to Ball State,
Yeah.
running back coach, then running backs recruiting coordinator, and then offense coordinator and quarterback coach. Is how I finished there
Mhm.
at Ball State. So that's kind of been my journey. I've had a unique journey in terms of the way my dad's career was growing up.
Yeah.
I was in the state of Indiana my whole life.
Mhm.
And then you can really see my career has really been within a 2 hour radius. So
100%.
um, that's been really cool for me
Yeah.
because the familiarity of the places I've been and
Yeah.
where I'm recruiting and things of that nature, that there's really no surprises. So
100%.
that piece of it has been very helpful for me. And I'm not saying everybody has to have that track or that route. You can learn anywhere and do things, but it has been a benefit for me.
100%. It's great, like you said, within that 2 hour radius within the state of Indiana, so you can
Yeah.
really recruit and hit Indiana hard on the recruiting trail
For sure.
and the
Indiana,
recruiting
and
side.
really, I say that most of the places I've been has been kind of a recruiting map of about a 5 hour radius. So,
Yeah.
whether it's Chicago, whether it's Cincinnati,
Yeah.
Columbus, Cleveland, St.
Mhm.
Louis,
Yeah.
um, down to Nashville, I've had a lot of experience in that 5 hour radius. And I've had a piece of a lot of those places in terms of recruiting, whether, I've recruited uh, pretty much anywhere in the state of Indiana I've had as a primary area.
Mhm.
I've had
Mhm.
a piece of Chicago. I've had a piece of Louisville,
Oh,
Nashville,
wow.
Cincinnati,
Okay.
Dayton, things of
Yeah.
that nature. So I'm well traveled that way, and obviously Cleveland as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Ohio, Indiana, those are
Hmm.
great recruiting areas. And so
Sure.
when you think about, always try to talk about I'm teaching now. I mentioned this. I'm teaching now. I'm a professor now of sport management.
Hmm.
And when I did my teaching interview, they asked me about my teaching philosophy, right? What's your
Yeah.
teaching philosophy? What do you do in the classroom in terms of teaching? So I wanted to kind of throw that to you. When you think about your coaching career, you think about, and it evolves over time, right? They said
Yes.
teaching philosophies evolve over time the same way coaching philosophies do. And I think of coaching as teaching as well, right? You're doing this
Yeah.
similar thing. So what would be kind of your coaching philosophy, and how has that evolved over time?
One thing I think about is this. I think coaching is teaching at its best. I
100%.
think that's there's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you're dealing with failure so much.
Mm-hmm.
And you're dealing with bringing people up, and obviously you're coaching them not only on maybe schematics or X's and O's of something like that, but
Yeah.
you're teaching them through failure, teaching them through success,
Mm-hmm.
adversity, all the things that happen to us in sport.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's football, basketball, baseball, you name it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that part of it. But by and large, my philosophy is relationship based. You know what I mean? I think you got to get to know the people, and you got to get to know the players
Yeah.
that you're working with or you're coaching
Mm-hmm.
in order to reach them to make them reach their full potential. The old saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I
Yeah.
think that's so true, and I think that's so true from a staff standpoint too.
Mm-hmm.
When you got guys that you're working with, they better know that you care about them, and that you got your back. And willing to work really hard. So
Yeah.
I think everything to me is based on that, the
Yeah.
relationship piece of it, because we can, if we have a good relationship, we can reach places we might not have thought were possible just based on hard work and an understanding of what it's going to take to get where we want to go.
100%. And I'm all about, and I worked with you with Ball State and their football team when
Mm-hmm.
you were there with
Yeah,
Coach New, and always
yeah,
loved the culture
yeah,
that was built, and that culture piece. And I think that's so important. Building a great culture. Wins and losses, obviously, they're
yes,
important as well, but I like how you talk about being relationship driven, and that really
yeah,
speaks to me in terms of building a great culture. And
yep,
that comes from building good relationships and building a solid foundation of relationships. So that's great to
100%. I
hear.
think I think the relationship piece is so big because, in our in anything, in any teaching, but especially I think in coaching,
Mm-hmm.
two of the biggest things is being honest, all
Yep.
right, and being loyal. But
Yep.
I think with players specifically, you better be honest with them, and
Yep.
sometimes you got to tell them things they don't want to hear, right?
Yeah.
But if you can do that from a level of love and a level of this is to make you better.
Mm-hmm.
I still think players want that. They want someone to be honest with them. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really important. I think a lot of people want to dance around things.
Yeah.
But when you tell somebody exactly where they're at, you can have a great conversation about it and be open to that. And I think that, generally speaking, maybe not right away,
Yeah.
but it's going to make them a better player, pretty quickly.
Yeah. That helps you grow as an individual if you're able to have those hard but tough but loving
Yes,
conversations like you mentioned
100%.
sometimes. And so it's great to see that piece. And so speaking of relationship building, obviously with NIL, with transfer portal, with all those things, I've heard from a lot of coaches. I've read a lot of articles and stuff that say now it's so hard to do that over the
Mhm.
course of the 4 years for athletes because of transfer portal and NIL. How do you
Right.
attack that, especially from a recruiting standpoint at Butler now, in terms of NIL and transfer portal? What's your
Yeah,
kind of
I
attack
think
there?
you have to be mindful of it.
Hmm.
I think any program at the college level in football
Hmm.
still has to have a strong, strong high school base.
Yeah,
We certainly were here. We're a little bit different in the league we're in too, so we're not going to be, just knocking everything out of the park from an NIL standpoint.
100%. Yeah.
Um, from a portal, I think that sure there's going to be some attraction to that, and you got to be open to filling some needs at position. I think one thing that's making it harder and harder in college football is this rule for the schools that are opting into revenue sharing,
Yeah.
like we are at Butler.
Yeah.
um, you can only have 105 guys on your roster.
Mm,
So with that, if a certain position gets attacked with injury, well,
yeah. Then.
you're going to have to. So I always think of offensive line specifically,
Hmm.
really hard to win with young offensive linemen in college football. They're just not
100%.
physically ready to do it.
Yeah.
So with that, that's where the transfer portal I do like is sometimes
Gotcha.
you're able to find a player that might be a little bit older, more mature, things of that nature
Hmm.
that can help you.
Gotcha.
So that piece of it, that kind of from philosophy, I think you got to be open to it. I still
Hmm.
want to always recruit good, strong high school
Hmm.
players, good programs
Yeah.
um, that are going to build your program
On an
as they
upward
grow.
trajectory. 100%.
Yep.
100%. I like the mentality in that on that is great
Hmm.
in terms of how that's attacked. But before we end the podcast, I have two questions. Number one, I always
Hmm.
end it with what's the best piece of advice throughout your career? What's one of the best pieces of advice that you've gotten throughout your
Yeah.
career?
You
If you
know,
could name one.
I think part of advice I've had is, um, you know, always listen.
Hmm.
Always be open to anything,
Hmm.
especially as you're growing and learning things. Never forget to keep learning.
Yeah.
And why I say that is you might have a goal to be an offensive coordinator. You might have a goal to be a head coach one day.
Yeah.
But your role at the time might be graduate assistant. It might be the running back coach, whatever it is. Well,
Yeah.
certainly be the best graduate assistant or running back coach you can be in the country.
Yeah.
But as you're sitting in staff meetings and you're sitting in different parts of things that go on in a football program,
Yeah.
make sure you're always listening, always taking in information, maybe thinking of things that you really like, or
Hmm.
maybe that's not how I would do something.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I think that's always really, really important.
Yeah. And that's really like it's great to hear kind of just soak up as much information as you can because I
100%.
see a lot of
Never
young
stop
people
learning.
that and obviously with coaching ball, high school ball, out in Colorado and now here in
Yeah.
Kentucky, like really I started the podcast as a way for student athletes, to use my connections to get student athletes to understand like, hey, here's what you got to do to get to the level that you want to get to,
Yeah.
and that's
Right.
it's great to see kind of you explain that of like, yeah, like
Yes.
soak everything in, learn everything. You might not be in the position you're in now, but if you work at the things that you work at, you'll get there eventually.
100%.
So
100%.
yeah, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time, Coach Lynch, and
Anytime, man.
appreciate you
Appreciate it.
you spending the time. But that's all the time we have for this episode of the Athlete Insights podcast. Again, I want to thank Coach Lynch for taking the time and spending with me today. And you can follow Coach Lynch. I'll have your social media handles on the video and YouTube,
Perfect.
on Spotify, all that stuff. So you can follow
Awesome.
Coach Lynch. You can follow the Butler Bulldogs throughout their
Appreciate it.
season as well. And then you can also find my podcasts, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, pretty much everywhere you get podcasts, you'll find this one. So
Well, thanks for having me.
yeah, so it's great. Appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.